All right, everybody. I am welcoming my son, Jordan Phillips, who many of you know and have run seminars with me since January. And Jordan is a plethora of knowledge and will be able to give deeper insight onto many of the topics we've been talking about. Jordan has a degree in Bio-Chem and is probably one of the geekiest people I know when it comes to supplements and nutrition. Jordan has been, I'm not just saying this because he's my son, Jordan has been way ahead of the curve in all of this stuff since he was about 10, 11, 12 years old. He has spent most of his free time really looking into being healthy and how science works. So he has a passion for it, and that will come out very clearly as we move along. What I'm going to do with Jordan is I'm going to ask him to explain the medication that I was talking about regarding the zinc, how this escort of zinc into the cell to saturate the cellular fluid with zinc and acts as an antiviral. And he'll even talk to you about things that you can consume that may increase the zinc in your cells naturally. Then I'm going to review some of the things that we talked about with Jordan so you can get an idea of his take on some of the things that I've been talking about the past 5 days. But first, let me give a quick shout out to my man Mitch, who I'm going to include the video in the newsletter and his kind words, and I appreciate them very much. But Mitch, I know you haven't seen Jordan in a while, but can you believe how big he's gotten? So here we go. So let's start off. Jordan, why don't you tell us a little bit about this medication, how it works, and why us just taking more zinc supplements or more zinc certainly isn't the answer, and in fact a problem. I held the position that if you take too much zinc, you're going to antagonize copper and iron, and if I'm wrong in any of that, please let me know.
No, that's definitely true. Like, it will antagonize copper and it'll antagonize iron and probably other minerals as well if you're taking way too much zinc. The way that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, the two medications that are being researched right now for coronavirus treatment, the way that they work is they act as something called an ionophore for zinc. And what an ionophore is it basically means that it attracts zinc to the molecule. So it forms a complex with the zinc, and that allows the zinc to get through the cell membrane a lot more easily, and that saturates the cell with zinc. And zinc ions can act as antiviral. They have an antiviral mechanism where they can inhibit the virus from replicating its own DNA. So the zinc will get into the cell, it'll prevent the virus from replicating itself, and that's how it acts as an antiviral. So that's how chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are working, but there are also things in nature that act as ionophores for zinc.
Let me just give a quick timeout.
Sure.
What Jordan's talking about is the prescription medication. So don't go on Amazon or go on CVS and look for this on the shelves. It is a prescription medication, and the point is the reason why it's prescription is because this prescription has the ability to escort the zinc into the cell. And how that's happening, is that fundamentally mysterious, Jordan, or do we know how it's actually?
No, it makes sense. It's things that act as ionophores generally will saturate cells with the ion because it puts the zinc in a coordination complex that allows it to be absorbed more easily into the cell. It's pretty understandable. The other thing, though, is that I want to be clear about chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine for a second. There's actually no zinc in that medication. Mm-hmm. There's no zinc atoms, there's no zinc molecules at all in chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. What it's doing is taking the zinc that's already in your body and the zinc from your food and putting that into the cells.
Right, so let's talk about that for a second because a lot of people maybe don't understand that how different minerals, electrolytes are in your body are in higher concentration in certain areas. So for example, most of the potassium in your body is in your cells where they belong and not in the blood. If there's too much potassium that leaks into your blood and that ratio becomes out of balance, then you may suffer from an acute heart attack, right? So understand that percentages of what's happening in the blood as opposed to in the cell are by nature regulated by your body. So what Jordan's saying is that the zinc that's normally in the blood, and correct me if I'm wrong here, can be escorted more readily into the actual cellular fluid, and that is what's actually helping create the antiviral effect.
Yeah, exactly. And That's the other thing about viruses. A lot of people, like I've been seeing this going around where people will say, oh, make sure you gargle with salt water to, help clear out the virus. But what a lot of people don't realize is that viruses are not just on the surface of your body or on the surface of your throat or in your nasal passages like a bacteria would be. They don't just form a film and live on the surface of your cells. They actually enter into your cells. Gargling with salt water is not going to do anything because it's in your own healthy cells. That's why you need to get the antiviral medication into your cells for it to do its job. You need that zinc in your cells or it's not going to do anything.
Outstanding. So continue what you were saying about some natural foods that could possibly help.
Sure.
This process.
Yeah, so there aren't a whole lot of them. There's some research on using quercetin as a ionophore for zinc. Quercetin is found in a lot of leafy green vegetables. It's found in tea. But the bigger one is actually EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate is I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that. It's a component of green tea. And there's some research that it acts as a ionophore for zinc as well, and it can help zinc get into cells. And on top of that, there's other components of tea that also boost the immune system, and they seem to activate natural killer cells. So, I mean, there's probably a twofold benefit from consuming some EGCG during this time.
Excellent. And is it only in green tea and matcha, or we also get this from white tea, black tea?
Yeah, it's in white tea, it's in green tea. It's probably in black tea, but the black tea has way lower concentrations of it because it's fermented for a little while. But the components that are in black tea might be metabolized into things that can act similarly to EGCG. I don't know for sure, but the molecules are very similar, so it's not unfeasible.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't matcha more concentrated with EGCG than even just regular green tea?
Yeah, the matcha would definitely be more concentrated just because you're consuming the whole tea leaf, so you'd be getting more EGCG just by that.
Excellent. So maybe a cup or two of matcha or a good green tea along with eating your fruits and vegetables could go a long way here if you haven't been already. So what I want to do next with Jordan is, actually, let me ask you another question that comes to mind. And this is unscripted, so I'm just going to show you, this is kind of how conversations go with me and Jordan. And when we're together, this usually goes on for hours. So he may not know the answer, but I'm going to ask. And if he does know the answer, we're going to find out for you. So I've been talking a lot about insulin resistance, and we know that insulin has a lot to do with how glucose enters the cell, and then similarly, we know that it has something to do with with potassium. What do you think? Does it have something to do with zinc?
Yeah.
What if people are insulin resistant and how zinc enters the cell? Is there any research on that, or do you think that it's possible or probable?
I to be honest, don't really 100% know. I know that potassium and magnesium are both things that can be affected by insulin. I don't necessarily think that translates to it being other minerals. I think that, magnesium and potassium are going to be, they have different hydration spheres, it's called, because of the ion size. They have lots of different, the actual size of the ion is different.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think that it could be universalized to say that, even though zinc and magnesium have the same charge chemically, it might not be the same properties.
So what we're going to do is we're going to check that out for you,
Yeah.
and we're going to get a firm answer. But this is what we talk about. We think about things, and then we think about what might be an issue, and then we try to map it onto things maybe even before most people are talking about it, certainly in the mainstream. But we're going to find out that answer for you, real time conversation here. All right, so George, I'm going to take you through a review of the things I've talked about so far, and then we're going to get your take on it and anything you could add or disagree with. That might happen too. So I started first talking about digestion and how if we're going to be healthy, we need to think about how we prepare our foods. A lot of people just have a lot of issues digesting really healthy, fibrous foods, leafy greens, fruits and vegetables, certain proteins, certain fats. And my argument has been, we live in a society that has basically digested all of our food for us in boxes and cans, right? Everything is just super refined, super broken down, all the fibers taken out of it, super high fructose. And therefore, as we digest our food, it's already too broken down. My argument, and I'm going really fast here, but my argument is that when we don't demand from our body the resilience to break down these fibers and to really break down these fats, then we're not asking much of our pancreatic enzymes, of our gallbladder. We're not asking much of our gut microbiota and our diverticulum to be resilient and to get strong as they break these things down. And similarly, to break down these fibers into short chain fatty acids for healthy gut microbes. So do you see this downstream effect of not just too much sugar, but also way too highly processed foods out of boxes, cans, and packages? Would you agree with that? What other things might be an issue?
No, yeah, I do agree with that. I think that breaking food down in the right way is also probably a good thing. Yeah, I mean, refined foods, things that are in packages, cans, it doesn't take much to digest those things because they're so refined, they're so broken down. But there are instances where obviously breaking food down is a good thing, like fermentation. Right. You're letting the microbes break it down for you. It's almost like out of the body digestion in a way. It's different than putting something in a can because you're actually getting the development of these short chain fatty acids. You're getting the development of broken down carbohydrates and fibers from the fermentation process that you wouldn't be getting from eating something out of a box. So eating fermented food, even though it's something that's broken down pretty easy to digest, it's probably a good idea to include that. I'm trying to think. So you said, is there anything else that?
Yeah, but to go along with what you just said there, like even just soaking seeds and nuts right overnight in a refrigerator, or just buying sprouted grains or sprouted nuts and seeds similarly, right, would be easier to break down if you're having issues digesting them. But then you also, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, where some people just have genes for histamine, or they're just in a situation where they have allergies, they have all these things going on in their body, they're just generally unhealthy, and then they say, oh well, I'm so happy to hear that I can eat these fermented beets or this fermented red cabbage or these fermented carrots. This is great because I always had trouble digesting these things. They buy them and then all of a sudden they have this high histamine response. It's the bacteria, right, that's causing this high histamine. So I just had this conversation this past weekend with somebody who has asthma and all these other issues. And we really broke down 5 things to look at with this, because this is a person who's very likely to have a histamine response even in the presence of really healthy food, right? Because the fermented foods have benefits beyond just the pre-digestion. It's very high in vitamin K2, plus you're getting all your vitamins and minerals from those vegetables. But consider your work environment. How ventilated is it, right? So if there's a lot of dust, mold, etc. She works in a cubicle, not a cubicle, but in a corner office. So I said, buy an air purifier, which usually works in about a 80 to 100 square foot area very effectively, because she does have seasonal allergies. Next, I told her in her home, get rid of all the scented candles, just anything that's aerosols, which she said, it's so funny you say that because I am so sensitive to certain scents. So I said, do away with the perfumes, even certain deodorants. Think about what you're doing there. Think about getting unscented. We know there are also genes for this as well, that not just the histamine genes, that people are extremely sensitive to detoxing these chemicals. PEMT is one of them. And then obviously looking at fermented foods. And then we talked about breathing mechanically, her breathing, how she's breathing, which she has reported, and maybe I'll include in the newsletter, how much better she's doing in just one session of doing that 5-minute breathing. She says it's like taking her inhaler, which I encouraged her to stop taking and instead do these breathing exercises for 5 minutes. And then there was one more thing that I'm forgetting about, but the point is that there's usually a better way to go about this. And so as you hear us talk, you may say, well, when I have that, I can't do that. Meaning if it's a healthy food, you're thinking you can't eat it or can't break it down. What I'm saying to you is look at the bigger global picture here and calm down the fires in other areas of your life as well. But go ahead. Anything else about digestion or the breaking down of fibers and feeding the gut microbiome, or anything that people might need to be more aware of?
Sure. I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, those are the big things, right? Eating less processed foods, eating foods higher in fiber, foods from different sources that are also high in fiber. So don't just eat beans and grains. Eat your leafy greens as well. You need to vary that. I think that's really kind of the main takeaway from there. If you can't eat leafy greens, if you can't eat fermented foods, then like you said, make sure you calm the fire down in other parts of your life. Try to prepare your food a little bit differently. Maybe try boiling or steaming your kale. Something along those lines. Don't just not eat them.
Right. So you could. That's another thing we talked about. We talked about like Jordan just said, just boiling it for 30 seconds. Literally boil the water, put it in for 30 seconds. It helps break it down. You could blend it, you could juice it. Mm-hmm. You could go slow at first. You don't have to have a giant bowl of leafy greens. Literally, I'm not kidding here. Start off with 3 leaves of something leafy and green, and because we're talking about for the rest of your life, guys. This is not right. We're talking about how to build healthy habits. So if it's 3 leaves one day, 4 leaves the next day, 5 leaves the next day, that will actually have literally a hormetic response on your digestion, because you're teaching your body to deal with something new, and it will get stronger, and it will the gut will gradually adapt to what you're asking of it.
Microbes do change in your gut. They don't just stay static. Like, you can entrain them to be, so there's so many species of bacteria in your gut, and we probably don't even know what all of them are. We probably don't even know what all of them are doing, which ones are beneficial, which ones aren't. We have a pretty good understanding of the ones that are beneficial when we see that they're beneficial, but there's probably tons that we don't know about it too. This is a not as static a biosphere down here. It's something that's constantly changing. So if you want to change your diet, it will adapt eventually. You just need to not give up after having 1 meal of leafy greens.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about something that I haven't gone much into, but we've been a proponent of organic foods for a very long time. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about Roundup and glyphosate and what that does to your gut, and just downstream effects that are really, really bad in order to have optimal digestion.
Yeah, so I guess technically, you have to kind of question how valid this is, considering the funding for the research, but technically glyphosate is not considered a carcinogen. But that's research that was done by the people that want to keep spraying Roundup on things. But it still does other things that we know are bad. Like, it mimics glycine, that's where gly comes from, glyphosate. That is going to significantly affect your bile acid quality, because glycine and taurine are the 2 things that conjugate bile acids, and that allows them to absorb fats and other things from your intestines. If glyphosate is there and it's preventing the absorption of glycine, if it's blocking the glycine from conjugating the bile acids, then it's not going to be able to do its job. So that's one of the main issues with glyphosate. The other thing is that it seems to bioaccumulate. So if you're eating a lot of it over a long period of time, it's going to take a while for those levels to go back down. So you want to try to avoid it as soon as possible and keep avoiding it and not continue to eat it.
Excellent. And would you say that it's likely having an effect on the gut microbes, knowing that these things seem to be sensitive to almost everything we put in our body?
Probably. There's certain medications that are on the market still that they think are actually acting by changing the gut microbiome. One of the more recent ones that has been researched is metformin, which is a diabetes medication. It's a blood sugar controlling medication. It might not actually be acting how people think it's acting. There's a lot of research now that shows that giving people metformin actually changes the gut microbiome into more microbes that produce agmatine, and agmatine acts as an insulin. It makes the insulin receptors more sensitive, and it can help lower blood sugar by that mechanism. So we don't even know all the things that are affecting these gut microbes. And especially something like glyphosate, something that is having these other effects, it's almost certainly doing something to your gut microbiome. So yeah, there are all sorts of chemicals, all sorts of drugs, all sorts of environmental things that can affect how your microbiome is acting.
Excellent. And so the whole point of us talking about digestion and the gut microbiome is and zinc and potassium and all these molecular things is that this really is your immune system, right? Like all of these things are part of an immune system. I've made this argument that nobody can really claim that they know exactly what the immune system is. There's so many parts of it that are fundamentally mysterious. And the reason why we did 12 weeks is because we're letting you know that all 12 of these things and many more that we haven't even touched, all have something to do with the immune system. So it's not one thing, and it's not even, it's certainly a conglomerate of things, but there are so many other things that are just untestable that we have good reason to believe that probably has something to do with your immune system as well, meaning like just your mental attitude. Just your mental attitude, which, how do you measure that, right? How do you really measure somebody's lack of fear or total panic? These are things that are hard to measure, but most people would agree, and most scientists would agree, that certainly has something to do with your immune system. Yes, we can say that certain hormones are upregulated, and we can see it happening in your mind and in hormones, but you can't see it in real time all of the time. And a lot of hormones change very, very rapidly in the body. So doing an experiment like that would be very, very hard. I'm just giving you one example of things that are very hard to measure, but almost certainly have something to do with your immune system. But what we are going into are the things that we know for sure have something to do with immunity. And so the next thing we talked about was mitochondrial health. And we did I did a very easy sort of Cliff Notes thing here, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about mitochondria, why they're important, and some of the things that maybe are happening along the way that are certainly the habits that most Americans have that are certainly bad for it, and what the heck do they have anything to do with immunity and organ function?
Yeah, I mean, so the mitochondria obviously produce ATP, which we talked about, the source of energy for a lot of reactions in your body, for muscle contraction, for enzymes. ATP isn't just a source of energy, it also acts as a substrate for a lot of enzymes. So what that means is it'll go attach to the enzyme and help it do its function. So if you're not producing optimal amounts of ATP, if you don't have optimal amounts of mitochondria, then you're not going to be doing functions that you need to be doing. And the most essential functions are the ones that are going to be preserved first. So your immune function is going to go way down if you don't have optimal mitochondrial health.
So let's just stop there. And so Jordan's describing like a triage here, right? So your body works according to a triage. So what does it want to make sure that you're doing? It's going to make sure that your organs are functioning first, right? Like your heart is pumping. So Jordan can talk a little bit more about this, but it's no coincidence that there's higher concentrations of mitochondria in the organs that are most important, right? So go ahead and continue.
No, that's great. Yeah, the mitochondria also have this effect of breaking down short chain fatty acids, and those are used for energy. Those are used to feed gut bacteria as well, and those gut bacteria are also implicated in immune responses. We know that a lot of our immune system is in our gut. It prevents a lot of things from passing through the intestinal barrier, getting into our bloodstream. It helps kill anything that was on the food that we ate that we don't want in our bodies. It helps prevent the population of our gut by things that we don't want populating our gut. So I mean, I think those are the two main ways that the mitochondria would affect our immune system. And then I'm sure you've talked about this in the past too. There's so many ways for the mitochondria to go wrong. There's so many ways for that to not be.
So talk to us a little bit about this. I talked a little bit about oxidative stress proximal to the mitochondria, and how the research now is really showing that what we're seeing here is sort of this backup, right, in this electron transport chain, and that this proximal oxidative stress, because there's just so much food coming in, we just overeat, right? Americans really don't need more nutrition, meaning we don't need more food, right? What we need to do is eat the right food at the right times. And I talked a little bit about the benefits of intermittent fasting and maybe closing the eating window. These are little hacks that we could do to basically give our body rest and let those I use the train analogy to go from one stop to the next, in those complexes in the electron transport chain. But what is there anything more you could add here? Do you agree? Do you disagree that this oxidative stress is really what's causing so much of the inflammation in the body and downstream effects for long-term illnesses?
Yeah, sure. Oxidative stress, malnutrition, so like not consuming dietary antioxidants is pretty important to help protect mitochondria. And there's nutrients that help mitochondrial health as well, like carnitine, acetyl-L-carnitine, well, it's known as Alcar probably if you see it as a supplement. NAC, I mean, cysteine in general. A lot of these things are helping to get the short chain fatty acids into the mitochondrial membrane to do this oxidation. So, yeah, I mean, the oxidative stress is one of the huge issues of how it goes wrong. But if you're not eating varied and enough of certain foods, then yeah, that can also cause problems too.
Excellent. And talked a little bit about just going back to along with mitochondrial dysfunction, where what would that be? Obviously, we know that eating too much causes a problem. Not moving enough causes a problem. Not sleeping enough causes a problem. If you want mitochondrial dysfunction, just eat poorly, eat too much, don't move your body, don't sleep well, get too stressed out. Stress is a huge part of this. I talked a little bit about, and for those of you that may not believe this or haven't done the research yourself, but just talk a little bit about statins and CoQ10, ubiquinol, and what we know there about the electron transport chain and what's happening.
This isn't just so the statins and the CoQ10 isn't just something that people are saying and it's going to pass in a few years. Like it's not one of those fad things. This is actually researched and 100% true that statins decrease levels of CoQ10. This is researched and true. It's not something that is just made up. And the reason why we know that is because doctors have noticed people getting a lot of muscle cramps on statins a lot of the time. And well, on top of the fact that we can measure lowered levels of CoQ10 in people taking statins, on top of that, giving people that are getting muscle cramps on statins CoQ10 stops the muscle cramps because it's preventing the depletion of the CoQ10. It's 100% true. It's not just made up.
Outstanding. So I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but again, if you want mitochondrial dysfunction between not eating the right foods and eating too much of the wrong foods, just overeating in general, not moving your body, not sleeping enough, etc., certain medications can downregulate mitochondrial function. So if we have that along with a really bad gut microbiome, this almost certainly maps onto one of the many or two of the many, or you can take your pick, autoimmune diseases that you become more susceptible to. So what do you think of that research and what's happening there? Maybe talk about what really is an autoimmune disease, what's happening there, and why would it make sense for your body to do exactly what it's doing in an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, I mean, so there's tons of different types of autoimmune diseases, but essentially what the core of all of them is it's your immune system attacking something that your body's making that it should not be attacking. So in the case of multiple sclerosis, your body's immune cells are attacking myelin sheath peptides. So it looks for these chains of amino acids that are on the myelin sheath, and it builds antibodies against those proteins. So the antibodies will go and signal for the body to attack those proteins. There's tons of different autoimmune diseases, and there's tons of different proteins. Basically anything in your body can be attacked by your immune system if you have an autoimmune disease.
So would you agree it's sort of an over response from the body to something that should normally be there, but the body sees it as something that's not supposed to be there?
Sure. Yeah, it's an over response, but it's also an entraining, which is why giving people immunosuppressants doesn't make their symptoms go away. It's your immune system is still entrained to attack these proteins, no matter what it doesn't matter how weak your immune system is, it's still going to prioritize that because it's signaling, hey, there's a threat here. That's a huge problem, because if there's a bacterial cell in your body, it's never going to just ignore that and say like, okay, you know what, we're a little bit weak right now, let's just ignore the bacteria. That's not how that works. So if you have these antibodies in your body for your myelin sheath proteins, it's always going to be an issue. Your immune system is going to be entrained to attack it. And we don't 100% know for sure how this entraining happens yet. That's an area of a lot of research right now. A lot of people are looking at something called toll-like receptors, TLRs, to try to look at how this entraining is happening, because toll-like receptors, essentially what they're responsible for is for recognizing when something is a threat. So it will basically like scan some type of protein, some type of molecule from a bacterial cell, from a yeast cell, from a virus, from whatever, and say, is this a threat, is this not a threat? And then it'll activate the immune system to attack that thing that was scanned by the toll-like receptor. So those receptors you might hear a lot more about in the future. I'm sure there's some implications in autoimmune diseases there.
Now, some autoimmune diseases are genetic, but would you agree that much of the research is also revealing the fact that people that would have compromised gut, IBS, people that have just in general issues with what we would call obesity, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome is the word that I'm looking for, my goodness. This quote unquote metabolic syndrome, which is really a conglomerate of a whole bunch of things that we've been talking about, high blood pressure, along with gut disturbances. Would you say that there is strong evidence that these people are much more prone to autoimmune diseases?
I to be honest, I don't 100% know off the top of my head. I would not be surprised at all if that were the case. I do know that, obviously, people that are obese are more prone to diabetes, and diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It's an autoimmune response to beta cells on your pancreas. So like that, you can see that is also.
What about the argument of just a compromised gut, right? And that these pathogens, so that's where I'm driving about. Like if we know that the mucus lining of that gut, which is very, very thin, it's much thinner than a human hair, that's what you have. It's basically guarding your gut. That if that gets broken down, and if those if the gut microbes can literally start to eat that mucus lining if they're not being fed these short chain fatty acids. When this compromise occurs, from what I understand, there is extreme likelihood that you can have things pass into the bloodstream that are simply not supposed to be there. And that can create a type of response that, again, like you said, becomes entrained in the body.
There's a huge response to bacterial cells being in your bloodstream by your body, because that means you will die if that thing starts to colonize your bloodstream. So as soon as any type of bacterial components leak from your gut into your bloodstream, there's a huge immune response to prevent that from happening. That can't happen. That's called sepsis. If bacteria is completely colonizing your bloodstream and your arteries and everything, that kills you. You basically can't recover.
That's actually what many old people die of, is sepsis poisoning.
Yeah. So that's why there's such a huge immune response to these components leaking out of your intestines into your bloodstream. Does that entrain the immune system to be hyper aggressive? Yeah, probably. I mean, if that's happening constantly all the time, and this is a huge immune response all the time, even if it's not entraining your body to attack itself, the body might just become so hyper aggressive that it starts seeing everything as a threat. It starts seeing.
So this is where we need to think about everything we've been talking about, right? So it's now not just this sepsis issue, right? But if it's super high stress, if it's mitochondrial dysfunction, if it's digestive issues, if you also have type 2 diabetes, you have fatty liver, which many people do. Like, people may be listening to this going, I'm not that person. I would tell you this. Look down at your stomach. Do you have a belly, right? Are you 30 pounds overweight? If you are, you're extremely likely to have some type of fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes. The current estimates of people that have type 2 diabetes is staggering. Many people suggest that 80% of the population are type 2 diabetic, at minimum 50%. So these are the types of things we're talking about. And ironically, if you have one, you almost have all of the other. That's why we're saying focus on one thing. Focus on your digestion, right? Focus on any of the things that we're talking about day by day by day over the course of this 40-day challenge. If you focus on one thing, you're going to be much healthier. We're already at 35 minutes, and I'm trying to keep these things to 30 minutes. But before I let Jordan go, is there any last thoughts or anything that you wanted to add?
I mean, I'm sure we'll probably make other videos in the future about these topics. So, I mean, for the sake of time, I think that we covered everything pretty well. Unless there's anything that you were in particular wanted to cover a little bit more, I think what we did was good.
All right, perfect. So we'll do more videos in the future. Jordan, thank you for your time. And guys, I'm going to get out more info every single day over the course of this 40-day challenge. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, please thumbs up. Please share it. And if you have any questions, as always, ask.